Hey everybody, Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a quick comparison between the Sony Alpha A7R on the left and the Sony Alpha A7 on the right. These are both full-frame mirrorless interchangeable lens cameras, the lightest ever made and smallest overall, really. And in terms of lens compatibility, well, you can throw just about any piece of legacy glass onto these cameras with an adapter. Keep in mind, of course, you will have to use manual focus. If you pick up Sony's own adapters, that will allow you to use A-mount Sony glass with autofocus that's actually as fast as pretty much flagship A-mount. So, of course, that'll take you beyond the autofocus capability of both of these models. But let's talk about price point and really who these cameras are designed for and what they represent. So, in terms of pricing, the A7R, again on the left, which is the higher end of the two models, denoted by the R in its branding, has a 36 megapixel sensor. And in terms of pricing, you're looking at a $2299.99 retail for the body alone. Whereas the A7 on the right has the very same 24 megapixel sensor found in the flagship A99 from last year, as well as the RX1. That camera retails for $1699.99. So a pretty big difference between these two, even though right now you can tell they look almost exactly the same. And much of the performance, as well as pricing, has to do with exactly what I just pointed out, the actual megapixel count afforded by the sensor, which again is the exact same full-frame sensor in terms of size, a 35mm equivalent, but how many megapixels does it have crammed into it? So both of these cameras are beasts in their own right when it comes to giving you raw performance in an incredibly small form factor that doesn't really compromise when it comes to features and overall control, manual control. I should really say an incredible OLED viewfinder right here that's top mounted, which I think, at least for me, is ideal and is for the general consumer, because it's definitely better for both lefties and righties when it comes to whichever eye is stronger for you to use. Of course, Sony has in the past mounted their viewfinder on the left-hand side on many cameras in their NEX now Alpha lineup, the A6000 being one of them that's about to launch. And in my opinion, the center mount speaks more to a pro feel, just because, again, it does actually accommodate everyone that could possibly want to purchase this and use it in a pro or otherwise fashion. NFC and Wi-Fi on both of these cameras, again, a similarity that has nothing to do with price point. A little bit of a difference in build. You can't see it here, but there's a little bit more metallic employed in the A7R build. The front plate, the base plate, and that's because it's really meant to be able to handle lenses that are substantially heavier and, also give an overall build quality feel that's above and beyond the lower price A7. And that's not to say that the A7 can't take on heavy glass, but clearly, if Sony was going to guess which of these cameras was going to see a little bit more testing, I would think they believe it's the A7R simply because of its price point and the fact that its resolution does rival some of the best full-frame cameras on the market. The A7, on the other hand, is more of an entry-level full-frame offering, and its price point reflects that. That in no way, by the way, takes away from it in any way, because this is unrivaled. There is nothing to compare either of these cameras to in the entire marketplace right now. In fact, the only cameras you'll be comparing either of these two are 3 to 4 times their size and don't necessarily offer the same video, or I should say still and video quality. Now, with regard to actual performance and autofocus speed, both are very, very similar. So there really are only nuanced differences between the two, is what I would say. First and foremost, the shutter on the A7R a little bit louder than the shutter on the A7, and that's because the R does not have an electronic first curtain. But in my opinion, if you are out there to get the best overall image quality, and that's what you're after, you're not going to really care about the noise that the shutter makes. After all, show me a full frame camera that doesn't make some noise, that doesn't get a little bit loud. But the autofocus speed, yes, is an area of contention with these cameras, and that's part of the compromise of the incredible form factor. You're looking at a little over 4 frames per second on the left in the higher end R, and a full 5 frames per second in the less expensive A7. The A7 also has hybrid autofocus under the hood. That's something the A7R does not. The R relies strictly on contrast detection for autofocus, whereas the A7, like much of Sony's NEX and now Alpha cameras, they're E-mount based cameras, of course, since these are both E-mount, something I neglected to mention, which is pretty critical, do have that hybrid of phase and contrast detection, something that is fairly standard in the industry that Sony was a little bit behind on, but has started to, I won't say reinvent themselves, but set a new standard, of course, with the brand new A6000 that has some of the fastest autofocus ever seen on an interchangeable lens camera. Of course, it is an APS-C camera, or based camera, the actual sensor size or class. Here we are dealing with a whole nother class of sensor with that full frame 35mm equivalency. And that's why we're at a different price point. You know, there you're dealing with an $800 kit. Here, the kit is going to run you $2,000. The A7R, on the other hand, no kit at all. And that speaks exactly to Sony, at least in their mind, thinking that any customer that buys into the 7R is either going to work with legacy glass, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, since the FE, which, by the way, FE is the full-frame E-mount lens native lineup of glass for these cameras, is very limited right now. You've got the 35mm f2.8, the 55, and these are all Zeiss lenses, by the way, that I've mentioned thus far. That's an f1.8. And then the Zeiss Zoom, which I'll be reviewing shortly, 24-70 f4 constant, and a piece of G glass, the 70-200, that's also f4 constant, coming out later. And of course, the kit glass, the kit glass is serviceable. I have that right here, and I've already done updates on it. It's a solid piece of glass at its price point, which is $500 retail, but clearly a much better value when purchased in conjunction with the A7. Especially if you pick it up on one of the promotions that Sony, as well as all of their authorized retailers, have been running lately. So there's a lot to like about both of these cameras. I think that Sony was wise in making 2 different price points and differentiating them. Unfortunately, this also meant that Sony was going to make less of the formerly NEX Alpha APS-C cameras. And this speaks to, I guess, Sony going after higher margins, as well as just a more advanced consumer that they weren't getting with their other mirrorless offerings. And that is clear in what they've done here, not only in the form of the sensor, but also the entire build, and the fact that there's so much customization, whether we're talking about the thumb dial or the finger dial right here up front, or the other customizable buttons that really allow you to have control of everything that you could possibly want to manipulate on the fly with this camera, which on a body size in this form that is actually palmable, even though clearly once you get a full frame lens on here, the story changes, is, again, simply unimaginable without Sony's 2 offerings that you see before you. I've mentioned that the OLED viewfinder is best in class, and that's because it simply is. I mean, they've even located the actual detection system, the proximity sensor there, on the top, something that they often throw to the side in previous gen cameras. And that was another inferior move, in my opinion, when it comes to engineering. You've got a multi-interface shoe up here that'll allow you to attach a variety of different flashes, external microphones, XLR adapters, you name it, it's out there. Weather sealed, both cameras completely weather sealed, and that is a big improvement, especially if you're a pro or just an average consumer who really wants to make sure that their product is not going to be in jeopardy. And you can see right here we've got the 2 plastic doors. I was missing the actual latch there. These unveil essentially your inputs and outputs for the camera. These are identical, by the way, on both the A7 and A7R, so I'm not going to do this for both cameras. And what you see right here is your mic in and your headphone out for audio monitoring. You then have the multi-port, which is used to charge your battery on board. Unfortunately, Sony does not offer any external options, at least out of the box. You'll have to buy that if you require it. But you do have the convenience of micro USB for charging. So essentially, odds are you already have one of those, but of course use the one that Sony provides with the adapter for the wall. And then lastly, an HDMI output, which gives you clean output so that you can grade your video. In terms of video performance, whether you're working with the 36 megapixel sensor in this camera or the 24 found in the less expensive A7, you're getting the same video mode. And of course, no 4K here. I wish that 4K had been part of the offering. I'm assuming that'll be something we see in the next generation of the A7 and A7R, whatever that evolves into. But in terms of video, 1080p, 60p, 24p, all in AVC HD, which at this point is a relatively old and far more clunky codec than I think most users desire, but still performs relatively well, and when compared to most of the competition, is beyond competent. In fact, it exceeds what the competition delivers. But with 4K, even from Sony's own products now rolling out, there's no question, I'll reiterate, 4K would have been a lovely feature to have here, especially considering the sensor is far more capable than 4K. It has no problem dealing with 4K. I mean, the brand new 4K cameras are based around Sony's 1-inch sensor that you'll find in the RX100 Mark II, Mark I, of course, and the RX10. But when it comes to that video performance, it's still very solid, and it's really more about the glass you pair it with, as well as the person behind the camera, really just utilizing it to their best abilities. And the bit rate for both cameras, 28 at peak, so that's as good as you're going to get in AVC HD. Of course, MP4 is there for easy sharing, but that's not where you're going to get high quality output from this camera or the A7. In terms of the SD card slot, it's been relocated, side mounted, something that we find with a lot of Sony's competitors that Sony wasn't really necessarily doing, at least in their E-mount class of cameras, but they changed that. Much like the fact that Wi-Fi and NFC has become standard, we do have access to the Play Memory Store for both of these cameras. That's going to give you the option to download free applications to directly control the camera, their smart remote control app, as well as pay applications like the time-lapse application. There are a whole host, and the store has grown considerably from its launch back with the NEX5R and NEX6, so a lot to like there. It's not just a gimmick, it's real, and it only improves what you can do with your camera, in my opinion. A smart move for Sony, and something that I'm glad they've continued to stick with. We have an articulating display, really smooth, a good range of motion. It's not going to flip around and allow for self-portrait, but this is not a camera designed to be a self-portrait machine, if that wasn't apparent already. But overall, just built really well. Performance is best in class. These are definitely game-changing digital imaging devices, and that's because you can't find anything that's going to give you this sort of performance in this form factor, both on the still and video side of things. Also the flexibility to, as I mentioned, work with any lens. So even if you aren't wild about the FE offerings that I mentioned before, you can very easily forego even the inexpensive kit lens and just work with whatever you already own. And even though that could be said for APS-C sized cameras, censored cameras, like the NEX offerings of yesteryear, the fact was most of you had full frame glass, not necessarily APS-C. And when I say most of you, of course, I'm speaking to people that already have a collection of full frame glass. If you had APS-C glass, then you had a very good fit for APS-C cameras as well. So that flexibility from the APS-C NEX generation has come now in a full frame form with far more advanced features, also far better menus, something I didn't mention. The actual software behind these cameras, you have a legit clean menu system like you'd find on Sony's Alpha cameras, which is why it bears the Alpha name. And this clean menu system, it just isn't there in previous E-mount generation cameras. So this is a big step all around, not just in terms of bragging rights, but every single piece of the A7R and A7 has been fine-tuned, in my opinion, by Sony's digital imaging gurus in order to make sure that it isn't just a marketing machine, but really does change the game. And for pros specifically, which is something that Sony really, they haven't been able to capture that market. The NEX brand, I think, impressed a lot of pros, but clearly could never act as a true replacement because of limitations initially with the E-mount lineup of lenses, native lenses, and then ultimately, as I mentioned, software, ergonomics, and customizable buttons. I mean, the NEX 7 TriNav system is fantastic, but arguably what we've got here with dedicated exposure compensation and, you know, the mode dial and then the customizable finger and thumb dials and just function and custom and the actual customizable buttons, you've got enough that it's easier to use and just overall a better package. I mean, really, Sony has pulled apart every positive thing they've done in imaging in terms of what's inside and outside and put it out in the form of these two cameras, in my own opinion. And that's what I love about both the A7R as well as the A7. Really, you can't go wrong with either of these cameras. They may seem expensive, but when compared to the competition, they are affordable. In fact, they are value oriented, if anything. Of course, the lenses, not so much. The FE Zeiss glass, very expensive. You're paying a premium to be in this club of full frame form factor that's really just unheard of. And Sony's been good at this. They're innovating. Hopefully that doesn't change with what's going on now, because as many of you may or may not know, things haven't been so great for Sony as of late. But digital imaging has been a bright spot. Let's hope it stays that way. Again, the A7R and A7, both fantastic cameras, both pretty much identical in terms of form factor. It's really all about, as I've mentioned, the sensor, the autofocus, and the build quality, and that electronic first curtain. I didn't even demonstrate the shutter noise because it's kind of absurd. I mean, I think it's trivial. I think the fact that people harp on it really speaks to the fact that they're, quite frankly, trolling rather than looking at innovation. And often innovation, as I mentioned, is just marketing. But with these two cameras, they stand to, again, redefine the digital imaging landscape. And I think Sony already did this with the mirrorless business. I think that Canon and Nikon both scoffed at the mirrorless business until Sony actually made some headway. And since they did, we've seen an explosion. And I'm not discounting anybody else, any of the other players out there, but Sony definitely made an early hard push with the E-mount. And I can't say that I saw the same from any other manufacturer. And the fact that we now have the culmination of that effort in the form of these two cameras, it happens to be a very good thing. So the A7R and A7, both great offerings, and of course, it's really a matter of whether or not you need the extra megapixels. I think most users are going to be very pleased, in fact, professionals, with the A7. The R is for those of you that really can't live without having the latest and greatest and need to have that extra pixel peeping capability for incredibly large prints. And that's not to say that the A7 is really going to come up short on large prints. It's not going to have any problem. I mean, you're looking at, again, a pro-grade sensor. So it's all a matter of personal preference and what sort of glass you own or plan to purchase. Again, I will be reviewing the Zeiss zoom lens, which is probably going to live on my 7R, and hopefully another Prime down the road. But any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. And of course, as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.